For 150 years, paleontology told us that dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. Complete, final, case closed. That is what every museum, every textbook, every documentary repeated, and almost none of it holds up against the molecular evidence that has been accumulating since 2007. Here is what the science actually shows. The clade Dinosauria, the formal evolutionary group that includes every animal we call a dinosaur, is not extinct. It is represented today by approximately 18,000 living species. That number comes from genomic surveys that have identified cryptic species invisible to morphological analysis alone. Dinosauria is, right now, the most species-rich group of land vertebrates on Earth. More species than mammals, more species than amphibians, more than any other terrestrial vertebrate group. The bird on your windowsill is not bird-like-a-dinosaur, it is a dinosaur. Taxonomically, formally, by every measure molecular biology has. And understanding how we got this wrong for so long, and what the DNA actually reveals about where these animals came from, requires going back to the place the entire story begins. A volcanic valley in northwestern Argentina that almost nobody in the general public has ever heard of. To understand why the dinosaur origin story was built on the wrong foundations, you need to understand who wrote it and where they were looking. In the 1870s and 1880s, two American paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope, fought one of the most ferocious scientific rivalries in history. The Bone Wars, as they came to be called, flooded American and European museums with spectacular fossil specimens from the American West, Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, Utah, giant sauropods, massive theropods, horned ceratopsians. The Natural History Museums of New York, London, Paris, and Berlin filled their galleries with these creatures. And in doing so, they built a map, an unconscious but enormously influential map that said, this is where dinosaurs lived. This is where they came from. This is where the story happened. Richard Owen had coined the term Dinosauria in 1842, working from British specimens. The American finds confirmed the British framework. Seeley's 1887 classification divided Dinosauria into two major groups, Saurischia and Ornithischian, and that taxonomy went untouched for 130 years. The problem was not the fossils. The problem was which rocks were being examined. The American Morrison Formation and the British Wealden were not scientifically representative. They were physically and politically accessible. They were where institutional money flowed and where ambitious careers were built. The critical window of dinosaur origins, the late Triassic, spanning roughly 237 to 201 million years ago, was almost completely unsampled in the regions that actually mattered. South America, Central Africa, the southern margin of the ancient supercontinent of Pangaea. This is where the first dinosaurs appeared. And for most of the 20th century, science was simply not looking there. In 1991, paleontologist Paul Sereno of the University of Chicago led expeditions to the Chicxulub Formation in the San Juan province of northwestern Argentina, a badlands of gray and violet volcanic ash that the locals call the Valle de la Luna, the Valley of the Moon. From this formation, Sereno's team recovered some of the oldest definitively identified dinosaur specimens ever found. Among them, Eoraptor lunensis, the dawn thief of the Moon Valley, approximately 231 million years old, bipedal, roughly the size of a Labrador retriever, built for speed, not power, unremarkable by Jurassic standards, extraordinary by any other measure. This is the earliest identified ancestor of every dinosaur that ever lived. The geographic implication was immediate and damaging to the established narrative. Dinosaur origins were not in North America, not in Europe. They were in the southern reaches of Pangaea, in what is now South America and possibly extending across into Africa. From Tanzania, a creature called Asilosaurus niacea, dated to approximately 243 million years ago, pushes the dinosaur line even earlier, and suggests the origin was not a single event in Argentina, but a distributed emergence across the entire southern margin of Pangaea. The old map was not just incomplete, it was built on the wrong continent entirely. Knowing where and when the first dinosaurs appeared answers one question. The deeper question, the one that changes what dinosaur dominance actually means, is why. Why did the dinosaur lineage arise in this particular valley, at this particular moment? Approximately 234 to 232 million years ago, just before the first unambiguous dinosaurs appear, in the fossil record, the Earth experienced a climate disruption that has received almost no mainstream attention. It is called the Carnian Pluvial Event. Its cause, a pulse of massive volcanism from the Wrangellia flood basalts in what is now Western Canada and Alaska. The volcanic activity released vast quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide. Global temperatures rose. Precipitation patterns shifted dramatically. For approximately 1 to 2 million years, the previously arid Triassic climate gave way to warmer, wetter conditions across much of Pangaea. This climate shift had a devastating effect on the dominant animals of the time. Rhynchosaurs, the barrel-bodied herbivores that formed the base of most Triassic food chains, were adapted to dry climate vegetation. When that vegetation collapsed and was replaced by early conifers and ferns, the rhynchosaurs collapsed with it. The dicynodonts followed. The aedosaurs declined. The ecological rulebook was rewritten within a geological instant. The dinosauromorphs were pre-adapted to exploit exactly this disruption. Bipedal, freeing the forelimbs for other functions. Erect posture, metabolically more efficient than the sprawling posture of most Triassic reptiles, and metabolically flexible. A 2014 study published in Science by John Grady and colleagues based on bone histology across hundreds of species confirmed that early dinosaur metabolic rates sat between those of modern cold-blooded reptiles and modern warm-blooded mammals, not fully endothermic, not fully ectothermic. In a world where the temperature and resource landscape was changing faster than specialists could adapt, this metabolic flexibility was the decisive advantage. The dinosaurs did not conquer the Triassic. They outlasted it. Over 30 million years, the other archosaur lineages faded through competitive displacement. By the end of the Triassic, 201 million years ago, dinosaurs were dominant on every landmass on Earth. Dominance was never inevitable. It was contingent, produced by crisis, not superiority. Here is the methodological failure that compounded everything else. Early paleontology relied almost entirely on morphology, the visible shape of bones, to construct evolutionary relationships. Morphology has a fundamental weakness: convergent evolution. Unrelated lineages, facing similar environmental pressures, frequently evolve similar physical structures. Two animals can look alike without being closely related. Two closely related animals can look completely different. A morphological family tree built without molecular data is perpetually vulnerable to this distortion. In 2017, a paper by Matthew Barron of the University of Cambridge, with David Norman and Paul Barrett of the Natural History Museum in London, published in Nature, proposed something that shook the entire field. After re-examining 74 dinosaur and dinosaur-adjacent species and recoding 457 morphological characters, Barron and colleagues concluded that Seeley's 1887 classification, the fundamental division of Dinosauria into Saurischia and Ornithischian, unchanged for 130 years, might be wrong. The most basic family tree in the field, used by every textbook and museum label in existence, was built on a classification that the evidence was calling into question. 130 years of assumed certainty, unraveled by a closer look. The molecular evidence did not come only from living animals. In 2009, Mary Schweitzer of North Carolina State University, publishing in Science alongside Matthew Wostrak and John Asara of Harvard Medical School, reported the recovery of intact collagen protein sequences from the fossilized femur of a Tyrannosaurus rex, 68 million years old, and from a hadrosaur called Brachylophosaurus canadensis, 80 million years old. Dinosaur DNA at those timescales is gone, degraded beyond any possibility of recovery. But collagen is more durable. And when Schweitzer's team ran molecular comparisons on those sequences, the result was unambiguous. The closest living relatives of Tyrannosaurus rex were not lizards, not crocodiles. They were birds. Specifically, the molecular signature aligned most closely with chickens and ostriches. This is what the proteins inside a 68 million-year-old bone actually show. Not theory, not analogy, direct molecular comparison. And in 2007, a team led by Chris Organ of Harvard University published in Nature that the miniaturization of the bird genome, birds have genomes roughly 1/3 the size of mammalian genomes, did not happen when birds first evolved flight. It happened tens of millions of years earlier within the theropod dinosaur lineage, before any animal in that line had wings. The compact genome was not an adaptation for flight. It was a pre-adaptation. Something in the theropod lineage was already moving toward what birds would become millions of years before the first bird existed. The genome was being written for a future it could not have anticipated. In December 2014, a consortium of 200 scientists led by Erich Jarvis of Duke University and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute published in Science the complete genomes of 48 bird species, representing every major avian order. The molecular clock analysis embedded in those genomes directly contradicted the standard extinction narrative. The major lineages of modern birds, the ancestors of songbirds, parrots, raptors, waterfowl, shorebirds, were not born from the ashes of the Chicxulub asteroid impact. They were already diverging 80 to 100 million years ago, deep in the Cretaceous, while non-avian dinosaurs still dominated the landscape. Some bird lineages were already in decline before the asteroid arrived. The Chicxulub impact 66 million years ago did not create modern bird diversity. It pruned an already diversifying group, removed its competitors, and allowed the survivors to radiate into every available ecological niche in the Paleocene. The extinction did not launch the birds. It simply stopped competing with them. Also, in 2014, Richard Green of the University of California, Santa Cruz, and colleagues published the complete genomes of all three living crocodilian families, alligators, crocodiles, and gharials. The molecular clock in those genomes placed the split between the crocodilian lineage and the bird lineage at approximately 240 million years ago. This independently arrived at exactly the same window as the Argentine and Tanzanian fossil record. Two completely different lines of evidence. One answer. The popular image of feathers belongs entirely to birds. Feathers are a bird adaptation. That is what the taxonomy assumed for over a century. Then in 2014, a dinosaur called Kulindadromeus zabicalecus was described from Siberia. An ornithischian dinosaur from the lineage of Triceratops and Stegosaurus. The group long assumed to be entirely scaly, and it had feather-like filamentous structures on its arms and legs. Not flight feathers. Not bird feathers, but feather-like integument alongside more conventional scales elsewhere. The genes associated with feather development exist across the dinosaur tree, not only in the theropod lineage that led to birds. The implication, still debated but increasingly supported by the genetic evidence, is that the common ancestor of all dinosaurs may itself have been feathered, that scales were the secondary condition in many lineages, that Tyrannosaurus rex at some point in its life cycle may have worn a coat of feathers before growing into the scaled giant that dominated popular imagination for a century. The feather did not begin with birds. The molecular evidence suggests it may have begun with the first dinosaur. Pull the full picture together. The Argentine fossil record, the protein sequences from Montana, the Harvard Genome Analysis, the 48 Genome Consortium from Duke, and the conclusion is not the 1-2 centuries of paleontology delivered. Dinosauria did not end 66 million years ago. The clade is represented today by approximately 18,000 species, more species than mammals, more species than amphibians, more individual organisms than any other group of land vertebrates. On every continent, including Antarctica, at every altitude, in every ocean, a saltwater crocodile is more closely related genomically to a pigeon than it is to a Komodo dragon, a fact that collapsed the traditional category of reptilia entirely, which turned out to reflect institutional convention far more than biological reality. Meanwhile, the crocodilians, the other surviving archosaur lineage, the genomic sister group of birds, tell the opposite story. 26 surviving species, several critically endangered. The gharial Gavialis gangeticus, which carries one of the most slowly evolving vertebrate genome architectures known to science. A genome preserving molecular information stretching back to the Triassic, has fewer than 300 individuals remaining in the wild. The most genomically ancient vertebrate lineage on Earth, nearly gone. Duration of dominance does not predict survival. Complexity does not predict survival. Size does not predict survival. The thread passes through the smallest opening available, and what emerges on the other side is determined not by what came before, only by what was flexible enough to fit. From the Schweitzer Formation to every continent on Earth. From Eoraptor lunensis, 231 million years old, the size of a dog, standing in a volcanic valley, to 18,000 living species outnumbering every other group of land vertebrates on the planet. The egg in your kitchen was laid by a direct descendant of Tyrannosaurus rex. The collagen in that shell, the architecture of the embryo inside it, the feathers on the animal that produced it, all of it connected by an unbroken molecular chain to the first small bipedal animal that survived a climate catastrophe in a Triassic Rift Valley when nothing we would recognize as the modern world yet existed. The molecular evidence did not confirm what paleontology had assumed. It dismantled it, systematically, study by study, genome by genome, and replaced it with something far more precise and far more remarkable. Dinosaurs did not go extinct, they learned to sing. If this channel is how you want to engage with ancient DNA science, the real findings, the actual papers, the evidence that changes what we thought we knew, subscribe. New episodes cover archaeogenomics, ancient proteins, and population history that mainstream science has barely started to explain to a general audience. The research is out there. Most people have never heard of it. That is what this channel is for.